In late February 2026, the global economy didn't stall because of a sudden stock market crash.
Right. It wasn't a banking failure or a housing bubble or anything like that.
No, not at all. It collapsed because of a 21-mile stretch of water, a 1982 treaty that literally nobody can seem to agree on, and, well, the algorithms of insurance underwriters sitting in London.
Yeah, which is just wild to think about.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. We are unpacking the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis today. And our mission here for you, our listener, is to understand the incredibly complex maritime laws that govern our oceans.
Right, because they're very confusing.
Oh, completely. We want to figure out why a seemingly narrow geographical bottleneck dictates global economics and exactly how a geopolitical conflict halfway across the world manages to dictate the price of, food at your local grocery store.
Yeah, that's the part that really hits home.
Exactly. We're looking at a huge stack of sources today. We've got stuff from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, insurance reports from Howden Re, and geopolitical analyses from CSIS. And what they all show is a world effectively put on pause.
Yeah, well, on pause definitely captures the macroeconomic result, but the catalyst on the ground was incredibly sudden. We are looking at the direct fallout from late February 2026.
Right. The strike.
Exactly. Following a massive United States and Israeli air campaign that resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, Iran retaliated. And they didn't just fire a barrage of missiles at military installations.
Which is what a lot of people expected them to do.
Right, yeah, the standard proportional response. But no, they fundamentally altered the flow of global commerce by effectively shutting down the Strait of Hormuz.
And the immediate shockwave of that was just staggering. Like, the sources we are tracking indicate Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, they just issued outright warnings forbidding passage through the strait.
Yeah, they laid down the law.
They did. They reportedly deployed advanced sea mines. And within days, there were 21 confirmed attacks on merchant ships utilizing sea drones, coastal artillery, and cluster missiles.
What's fascinating here is how this localizes the global system's fragility. Like, the Strait of Hormuz is essentially the physical fiber optic cable of the global economy, or, the aortic valve.
Oh, the aortic valve. I like that. Okay,
Yeah.
let's unpack this. If we think about that aortic valve analogy, it implies a singular point of failure.
Right.
Right. So for a student trying to understand this, is it accurate to say this is like someone physically clamping down the main artery of global trade and just waiting for the surrounding tissue to die?
Yeah, I'd say the severed artery analogy works, but only if you imagine an artery where the surrounding tissue immediately turns around and tries to rewrite the laws of biology to survive.
Right.
Because when that arterial flow stops, the pressure backs up instantly. This is arguably the most acute shock in the entire history of the global oil market. But to understand how a single country could just, turn off the global economy with a few drone strikes, we have to look at the map.
We do. Geography really dictates the rules of engagement here.
Exactly. It's all about the physical limitations.
Which means we need to look at the actual terrain. And the physical reality of this place is almost absurd when you consider how important it is.
Oh, it really is.
The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. But at its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 34 kilometers. You could run a marathon across it and have 5 miles left over.
And, the 21-mile figure is even a bit deceptive.
How so?
Well, because the water isn't equally deep across that entire span, the world's largest crude oil tankers, these massive, very large crude carriers, or VLCCs, they require incredibly deep water channels to navigate safely without running aground.
Right. They can't just sail anywhere.
Exactly. And here is the critical geographical quirk. Those navigable deep water shipping lanes, which are known as the traffic separation scheme, they are completely situated within the 12 nautical mile territorial waters of Iran and Oman.
Wow.
Yeah. There is no international water bypass.
So wait, every single drop of oil leaving the Persian Gulf by sea has to physically cross through the sovereign backyard of either Oman or Iran.
Every single drop, yes.
Which naturally takes us straight into the absolute quagmire of international maritime law.
Oh, yeah, it's a mess.
This is where high-minded legal theory smashes into the harsh reality of geopolitics. Because, wait, if the ships are literally in Iran's territorial waters, don't they have the right to make the rules?
Well, that is the trillion-dollar question, right? So the oceans are governed by the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Everyone just calls it UN-the-US.
Gankulas, right?
Yeah. And under Article 38 of UN-SULIS, a vital chokepoint like Hormuz qualifies for a specific legal regime called transit passage.
Okay, what does transit passage actually mean on the water?
Transit passage dictates that all ships, and this explicitly includes military warships and submarines, they have the right to pass through the strait continuously and expeditiously.
Without interference.
Exactly. The coastal states cannot interfere with, tax, or suspend that passage, even during times of heightened tension or, armed conflict.
But the treaty only matters if everyone signs it and agrees to abide by it, right?
Yeah, that's the catch.
Because Oman follows UN seal.
Yeah.
But Iran's relationship with it is essentially a legal loophole they've kept open for decades.
Exactly. Iran signed UN seals back in the 1980s, but their parliament strategically chose never to ratify it.
Wow.
And because they never ratified it, they argue they are not fully bound by all its provisions, specifically that transit passage regime. Instead, Iran relies on its own 1993 domestic legislation.
Okay, so they just made up their own rules.
Basically, under their domestic law, they claim the strait is governed by the right of innocent passage rather than transit passage.
Innocent passage. Okay, that sounds benign, but I'm guessing the word innocent is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
A lot of heavy lifting.
What is the practical day-to-day difference between a ship having transit passage versus innocent passage?
The difference is the amount of control the coastal state wields. Innocent passage allows a coastal state to block ships if they unilaterally deem the passage prejudicial to the peace, good order, or security of that state.
So Iran gets to decide what's peaceful.
Right. And furthermore, under Iran's specific interpretation of innocent passage, military vessels and submarines require prior written authorization from Tehran just to enter those waters.
Which the U.S. Navy is obviously never going to ask for.
Never.
Because asking for permission implies Iran actually has the authority to grant it.
Exactly. And that is a precedent the U.S. absolutely refuses to set. The international community, led by major maritime powers, completely rejects Iran's stance. They argue that transit passage in international straits like Hormuz has achieved the status of customary international law.
Customary international law. So what does that mean in plain English?
It's a crucial concept. Customary international law means the rule applies to everyone, regardless of whether a specific nation ratified the treaty or not, simply because it is the established, universally accepted practice of states.
Oh, like a common law sort of.
Yeah, exactly. And to back this up, they point heavily to the International Court of Justice's 1949 Corfu Channel case. That's considered the foundational precedent.
Let's hover on the Corfu Channel case for a second, because it seems to be the bedrock for why the U.S. feels so justified in its position here.
Yeah, so the Corfu Channel case involved British warships that struck sea mines while navigating through Albanian territorial waters.
Back in 1949.
Right. And the ICJ ruled decisively that warships have the right of transit through international straits, even if those straits pass directly through sovereign territorial waters, provided the transit itself is peaceful. The court established that a coastal state cannot unilaterally close a strategic strait, and it cannot suspend transit passage during an armed conflict. It is what legal scholars call an erga omnes obligation.
Erga omnes.
Yeah, it means a duty owed to the international community as a whole, not just to a specific treaty partner.
So Iran is essentially weaponizing this legal ambiguity. The sources referred to this strategy as lawfare.
Lawfare is the perfect term for it.
They aren't just blowing up ships. They are carefully framing their actions within a contested legal framework.
Exactly. Iran uses the law as an asymmetric weapon. By claiming they are merely enforcing innocent passage and, protecting their national security against U.S. aggression following the strikes, Iran deliberately blurs the line.
Right, because they were just attacked.
Yeah, so they operate in this gray zone between lawful legal deterrence and coercive ambiguity. Even though international law clearly dictates that transit passage cannot be suspended as a countermeasure, the sheer complexity of the legal debate gives Iran just enough diplomatic cover to pressure the international community while confusing the narrative.
But, all these legal debates and UN treaties assume the players involved actually care about the rules.
Right, which they often don't.
If you're a captain on a massive gas tanker staring down a swarm of IRGC speedboats, international law doesn't matter. What matters is what is physically sitting in those waters and why the potential loss of it is triggering emergency meetings at the European Central Bank.
Yeah, the real-world impact.
So what does this all mean? This isn't just about a 21-mile strip of contested water. It's about the economic engine moving through it. Why does the world depend on it so much?
Well, to comprehend the panic, you really have to look at the sheer staggering volume. Pre-crisis, back in 2024, we were seeing an average of 20 million barrels of oil passing through the Strait of Hormuz every single day.
20 million
Every day.
every single day. That equates to roughly 20% of the entire globe's petroleum liquids consumption.
Wow.
And we are also talking about 20 to 25% of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
Mostly from Qatar, right?
Yes, primarily coming out of Qatar's massive offshore North Field.
Okay. My immediate thought, and I'm sure anyone looking at a map is thinking this too, is about bypasses.
Ah, the pipelines.
Yeah. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are massively wealthy nations with incredibly advanced infrastructure. Don't they have pipelines that bypass the strait entirely? Can't they just pump the oil overland to the Red Sea or the Gulf of Oman and load it onto ships there?
They absolutely have pipelines designed for that exact contingency. Saudi Arabia operates the East-West pipeline, which is also known as Petrolane, and that runs to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea.
Okay.
And the UAE has the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline that terminates on the Gulf of Oman. But bypassing the strait isn't a political problem, it's a physics
A
problem.
physics problem.
Yeah. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, those pipelines are limited by their physical diameter and the sheer physics of moving highly viscous crude over hundreds of miles. Oh, right. You can only push so much liquid through a pipe.
Exactly. Combined, they have an excess unused capacity of roughly 2.6 million barrels per day.
Wait, so you have 20 million barrels of daily traffic completely blocked, and you only have 2.6 million barrels of alternative capacity.
That's the math.
It's like taking a high-speed 10-lane superhighway packed with rush hour traffic and suddenly forcing every single one of those cars to exit onto a single-lane dirt road.
It's a physical impossibility.
The system doesn't just slow down. The backlog destroys the grid instantly.
And that grid destruction materializes as an immediate price shock. We saw Brent crude oil surge from around $70 a barrel to surpassing $100 almost instantly, and it eventually peaked near $126 a barrel.
Which is painful at the gas pump.
It is, but focusing solely on the price of oil misses the deeper, more systemic catastrophe. This is where standard trade models fail, and where the Kiel Institute's analysis is so vital.
Right, the non-mineral shock.
Yeah. We fixate on the oil. But a staggering 60% of the 30,000 vessels that transit the strait annually are not carrying oil at all.
6 out of 10 ships are carrying something else. Wait, what is actually in those hulls?
They are carrying critical non-mineral commodities that serve as the foundational building blocks for other industries.
Like what?
Well, the Persian Gulf region accounts for 30 to 35% of global urea exports.
And urea is a fertilizer.
Exactly, the world's most common nitrogen fertilizer. They also export 20 to 30% of the world's ammonia. They produce 21% of the global supply of aluminum, which is essential for everything from automotive manufacturing to upgrading power grids for renewable energy.
Wow, I had no idea about the aluminum.
Yeah, and they even supply rare gases like helium.
Helium, like for balloons.
I mean, yes, but more importantly, helium is an irreplaceable component for manufacturing semiconductors and running MRI machines in hospitals globally.
That's terrifying. This brings us to the Kiel Institute's KITE model, the Kiel Institute trade engine.
Right.
The KITE model focuses on bottleneck effects.
Yeah.
Because the fallout isn't just about consumers paying $5 a gallon for gas. It's an asymmetric cost transmission.
A price cascade.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The price cascade. I want to trace this cascade because it seems to start with natural gas and end with global starvation.
Yeah. The price cascade is a brutal demonstration of global dependency. It works in sequential steps.
Right.
Step 1. Gulf natural gas exports are blocked from leaving the strait.
Okay, step 1.
Step 2 is where the chemistry comes in. Natural gas, specifically methane, is the primary feedstock for the Haber-Bosch process.
The Haber-Bosch process.
Right. This is the industrial process the world uses to synthesize ammonia and urea fertilizers. You cannot easily substitute methane with coal or renewable energy in the short run without completely retooling the factories.
So because that gas is trapped in the Gulf, global chemical and fertilizer production loses its primary ingredient.
Exactly. So it's a hard, physical bottleneck. The factories simply cannot run. They shut down.
Which leads to step 3.
Right. Step 3, global fertilizer prices skyrocket due to artificial scarcity. Within weeks of the closure, urea jumped from $475 to $680 per metric ton.
That's a massive jump.
It is. And step 4 hits the agricultural sector directly. Farmers around the world, particularly those entering the critical peak planting season in the Northern Hemisphere, are suddenly hit with massive input costs.
Because if fertilizer is too expensive, farmers use less of it,
Exactly, and that drastically reduces the crop yield per acre. The cost to grow wheat, cereals, and oilseed spikes, and the overall supply drops.
which leads to step 5, a severe global food security crisis.
Mm.
And the Kiel Institute data points out a grim reality here. This burden does not fall equally.
No, it is highly asymmetric.
An advanced economy like the U.S., which produces a lot of its own energy and food, might see a welfare loss of like negative 0.07%. But developing nations in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, countries that rely heavily on imported energy and imported fertilizers to sustain basic agriculture, they face welfare losses 10 to 20 times larger than the U.S.
Yeah, the cascade turns a localized naval blockade into a macroeconomic drag on the entire planet. The models estimate a $2.43 trillion drag on the global economy.
2.43 trillion.
Trillion with a T. That is roughly 2.3% of global GDP just vanishing into thin air. We saw immediate panic in the financial sector. The Dow dropped 1,000 points in the first days.
And South Korea got hit hard too, right?
Oh, absolutely. South Korea's KOSPI index actually triggered an automatic circuit breaker. It crashed 12% because their entire export-driven economy relies heavily on imported energy.
And Europe?
Over in Europe, the European Central Bank had to suddenly postpone their planned interest rate cuts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the energy shock fundamentally altered their inflation forecasts for the year. It forced them to keep rates high just as their economies were teetering on the edge of a recession.
But the terrifying part of all this economic devastation, I mean, the inflation, the food shortages in Africa, the market crashes in Seoul, is that none of it is an accidental byproduct of a conventional war.
No, it's very intentional.
This economic devastation is the actual weapon being deployed.
That is the paradigm shift of the 2026 crisis. Iran's primary battlefield isn't the water. The water is just the medium. Their real war is against the global economy itself.
So let's look at how that weapon is practically wielded on the water. Because if we look at the reality of the 2026 naval blockade, the sources describe a highly kinetic, terrifying environment for the merchant sailors caught in the middle.
Extremely kinetic.
We had the U.S. flag Stena Imperative being struck by projectiles while docked right in the port of Bahrain, killing a shipyard worker and igniting a massive fire. You have the Ethanova hit by 2 drones while underway. At least 21 confirmed attacks on bulk carriers, container ships, and gas tankers in a matter of days.
It is a violent environment, certainly. But there is a crucial concept introduced in the Howden Re insurance report that explains why the strait remains closed even on the days when no missiles are flying and the skies are clear.
And what is that?
It's what insurance underwriters and security analysts call the phantom blockade.
The phantom blockade. This seems to be the core mechanism of modern hybrid warfare. This isn't about sinking ships, it's about financial leverage. How does a phantom blockade actually function?
So a phantom blockade relies on the fact that Iran doesn't need to physically sink all 30,000 ships that transit the strait to close it. They just have to systematically alter the risk calculus of the global reinsurance market in London and New York.
The insurance guys.
Right. When a commercial ship travels through a recognized conflict zone, it requires specialized war risk insurance. Before this crisis, the war risk premium for a vessel navigating the Gulf was relatively low, hovering around 0.125% of the ship's total hull value.
Which, if we do the math, is still a significant chunk of change for a massive vessel. But it's a built-in cost of doing business.
Yeah, it's manageable. But once the IRGC, fast attack craft, and sea drones started hitting targets, the insurance algorithms and underwriters panicked. War risk premiums spiked astronomically. They jumped to up to 3% of a vessel's value.
Okay, let's ground that math in a real-world scenario.
Yeah.
Say you have a state-of-the-art liquefied natural gas tanker. The hull of the ship itself might be valued at $250 million.
Easily.
At a 3% premium, the cost just to insure that ship against war damage jumps from roughly $312,000 to $7.5 million for a single trip through the strait.
For one trip.
And that doesn't even factor in the insurance for the $100 million worth of cargo sitting inside the ship.
Exactly, but the cost itself is only half the blockade. The real mechanism lies in how global trade is financed. The banks that finance these massive shipments issue what are called letters of credit.
Okay.
When a bank looks at that $7.5 million premium and assesses the very real statistical probability of a drone strike, they simply refuse to underwrite the voyage.
They pull out.
They pull the letter of credit. Without that financial guarantee, the insurance coverage evaporates. And without insurance, maritime law and corporate liability dictate that the ship cannot legally or financially start its engines.
So the fleet is essentially grounded from 5,000 miles away. The Strait of Hormuz is paralyzed by insurance syndicates and banking compliance officers in London, not just by naval mines in the Persian Gulf.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this phantom blockade serves a very specific purpose for Tehran. According to the CSIS analysis, Iran is deliberately targeting the Gulf states' economic futures.
Their Vision 2030 plans.
Specifically, their Vision 2030 diversification plans. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE have spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars trying to transition their economies away from a sole reliance on pumping crude oil.
Right. They're constructing massive global logistics hubs, luxury tourism centers, advanced data centers, and renewable energy infrastructure.
Exactly. They're trying to position themselves as the next Singapore or Silicon Valley. They want foreign investment, tech companies, and international tourism.
And Iran's strategy of spiking insurance premiums and threatening continuous asymmetric attacks aims to fundamentally destroy that economic transformation.
Because if the Persian Gulf is perceived by global capital markets as a permanent high-risk war zone, foreign direct investment evaporates overnight, multi-billion-dollar contracts unravel, tourists cancel their flights.
Those massive data centers can't secure the reliable power or the baseline insurance they need to operate.
Iran is using the phantom blockade to make the region economically unviable for its neighbors' ambitions.
This naturally leads to the most obvious question, the one anyone listening is probably screaming right now. Why doesn't the United States Navy just escort the commercial ships through the strait?
Right, the convoy idea.
We possess the most powerful blue water navy on the planet. Why not just form massive convoys, surround the tankers with destroyers, and sail them through the 21-mile gap?
Well, on paper, a convoy system seems logical, but the logistics of naval escorts in a choke point like Hormuz are an absolute nightmare. First, you have the sheer volume of maritime traffic.
The 30,000 ships.
Yeah. Maritime security analysts estimate that implementing a rigid, heavily guarded convoy system would cap the transit volume at under 10% of normal levels.
10%, that's nothing.
You simply cannot marshal, stage, and move 20 million barrels of oil a day in slow-moving convoys. The delay at the staging areas alone creates a massive bottleneck that ripples through the global supply chain.
And then there is the tactical threat environment itself.
Yeah.
Because the U.S. Navy isn't fighting a symmetric force. They aren't lining up against Iranian destroyers that can be easily tracked on radar and engaged with conventional anti-ship missiles.
No, the tactical doctrine Iran employs is what military strategists call a mosaic defense. It is inherently decentralized and asymmetric.
Meeting lots of small threats.
Exactly. Iran relies on hundreds of small, highly maneuverable, fast attack boats that swarm a target from multiple directions simultaneously. They deploy low-flying, radar-evading, unmanned sea drones packed with high explosives.
And the coastal missiles.
Yeah, they utilize mobile, coastal, anti-ship missile batteries that are hidden in civilian infrastructure along the rugged Iranian coastline. They operate on a shoot-and-scoot principle.
And we can't forget the sea mines. Why is clearing mines so difficult for a modern navy? You'd think we'd have that figured out by now.
Because modern sea mines aren't those giant, spiky metal balls bobbing on the surface that you see in old World War II movies.
Right, they're not obvious.
Not at all. Modern mines have composite hulls that are virtually invisible to standard surface sonar. They sit silently on the seafloor, listening for the specific acoustic signature or magnetic distortion of, say, an LNG carrier.
So how do you find them?
To clear them, you need specialized minesweepers towing acoustic and magnetic sleds, moving at an incredibly slow speed of maybe 3 or 4 knots. And while they are doing that tedious, painstaking work, those minesweepers are sitting ducks for coastal artillery and drone swarms.
That's terrifying.
It's a mathematical impossibility to clear 21 miles of contested water quickly. So even with the U.S. Navy present, the residual risk to the commercial vessels remains unacceptably high for those insurance markets we talked about.
Which brings us to the volatile developments we are seeing in late March and April 2026. We are getting contradictory signals. We have ceasefire rumors, but also what military analysts are calling the multi-island gambit.
The geopolitical situation right now is incredibly fluid. President Trump recently delayed a 48-hour ultimatum directed at Tehran, citing, quote, productive conversations.
And the markets like that.
The global markets reacted instantly. Oil prices dipped slightly as algorithmic traders priced in a potential diplomatic de-escalation. But if you look at the physical reality on the ground, or rather, on the water, the military posture tells a completely different story.
The military buildup is undeniable. According to the industry analysis, the U.S. military is surging approximately 3,000 additional troops into the theater. And this specifically includes specialized elements like the 82nd Airborne Division and Marine Expeditionary Units.
Right.
And military planners aren't preparing for a massive D-Day-style mainland invasion of Iran. They're planning a highly discreet, time-limited operation to seize critical islands in the Gulf.
The multi-island gambit. The strategic targets are islands like Karg Island.
Why Karg?
Karg is vital because it serves as Iran's primary oil export terminal. It handles roughly 90% of their crude exports through massive sea island terminals and storage tanks.
Okay, that's huge. And there's another one, right?
Yes, another primary target is Qeshm Island, which is the largest island in the Gulf. Qeshm is heavily fortified, housing massive underground missile complexes and drone launch sites that effectively control the northern approaches to the Strait of Hormuz.
So taking those islands would be a game changer.
The strategic goal of this gambit would be to forcefully occupy these islands, dismantle Iran's ability to project asymmetric power into the shipping lanes, and physically pry the strait open.
It is a massive historic roll of the dice. I mean, the logistical nightmare of holding an island like Qeshm under constant asymmetric bombardment from the Iranian mainland is staggering.
It would be incredibly costly.
Because as we've seen, this localized 21-mile choke point has dragged the entire world into a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess. This brings us to the final major piece of this deep dive. Understanding the geopolitical chessboard and the competing roles of the United States, Iran, China, and Russia.
Yeah, if we start with the United States, we are witnessing a phenomenon we could categorize as strained supremacy. The military campaign to patrol the sea lanes, intercept drones, and degrade Iranian coastal capabilities is bleeding capital.
How much capital are we talking about?
It is costing U.S. taxpayers nearly $900 million every single day.
$900 million a day. That is an astonishing burn rate for an operation that isn't even a formally declared war.
It is entirely unsustainable, and that capital drain directly competes with vital domestic priorities.
Like the GPS Act.
Exactly. The U.S. has spent the last few years aggressively trying to rebuild its own industrial base, passing massive legislation like the GPS Act to secure domestic semiconductor manufacturing. A prolonged trillion-dollar entanglement in the Middle East drains the exact financial and political resources needed for the long-term strategic economic competition with China.
Not to mention the sheer domestic political pressure. When the crisis hit, gas prices in places like California crossed $5 a gallon almost immediately, and inflation spiked.
Yeah, voters feel that instantly.
And President Trump's rhetoric has been wildly shifting, reflecting the intense pressure of those domestic economic indicators. One day, he's at a rally threatening to obliterate Iran's energy infrastructure entirely, and the next day, he's floating the idea of taking over the waterway, calling it the Strait of Trump.
Yeah, demanding that international shipping companies pay tolls to the U.S. Navy for protection instead of facing Iranian attacks.
It brilliantly illustrates how deeply domestic politics and inflation are intertwined with this distant waterway.
And that shifting rhetoric also fundamentally calls into question the long-standing U.S. defense umbrella over the Gulf. For decades, the foundational agreement was that the Gulf states relied on the U.S. military to guarantee their security and the open flow of oil.
And in return,
they invested trillions of petrodollars into Western economies and treasury bonds. But as those states watched U.S. interceptor missiles deplete, the strait remained closed, and American political commitment waver, that confidence is rapidly eroding.
so they might look elsewhere.
If the Gulf states determine they have to fund their own rearmament and seek security guarantees elsewhere because the U.S. can no longer unconditionally protect them, that massive capital pipeline to the west dries up.
But if we shift focus to Iran, their strategy is equally complex. They aren't just blindly blocking every single ship that approaches the strait.
No, not at all.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They are deliberately weaponizing ambiguity.
This is perhaps the most cynical and frankly brilliant tactical aspect of their strategy. Iran is selectively allowing certain ships to pass.
Based on what?
Well, according to the maritime tracking data, they have actively permitted Chinese, Indian, Malaysian, and Philippine vessels to transit safely through the strait while aggressively attacking any ships linked to the U.S., Israel, or European nations.
But wait, If the goal is to cause global economic pain to force a ceasefire, why let anyone through? Why not just blockade it completely?
Because playing favorites fractures the international coalition against them. Think about it from India's perspective. If Iran explicitly tells you, your ships are safe, your energy supply will not be touched.
You're not going to want to anger them.
Exactly. You are far less likely to vote for UN sanctions or join a US-led military strike against Tehran. You are incentivized to protect your own economy. By executing this selective blockade, Iran rewards its geopolitical allies, heavily punishes its adversaries, and effectively prevents the international community from presenting a unified front.
And they maintain a layer of plausible deniability by utilizing their proxy network. They have forces like the Houthis in Yemen or various militia groups in Iraq launch some of the drone attacks, muddying the waters of attribution.
It's an absolute masterclass in hybrid warfare.
And speaking of adversaries, we have to look at who is quietly collecting the spoils of this conflict. While the U.S. and Iran are locked in this standoff, China and Russia are sitting back and profiting immensely.
Yeah, Russia profits directly and immediately from the price of oil. With Brent crude staying well above $100 a barrel due to the risk premium, Russian state revenues surge, funding their own war machine.
And the West just has to watch it happen.
The crisis has been so severe that it even forced the U.S. Treasury to issue 30-day sanctions waivers for Indian buyers of Russian oil just to keep the global supply afloat.
Wow. Handing Vladimir Putin an economic lifeline, the West spent years trying to deny him.
Precisely. And China's role is even more calculated. They seem to be playing a multi-generational long game here.
China is the ultimate beneficiary.
Definitely. Economically, they are buying heavily discounted Iranian crude oil through dark fleets and teapot refineries because they are the only major power willing to openly trade with Tehran.
And diplomatically.
Diplomatically, at the United Nations, China and Russia have teamed up to consistently block Security Council resolutions that would have authorized a unified international military force to clear the strait.
Of course they did.
And perhaps most importantly, from a grand strategy perspective, while the U.S. military's assets and political attention are entirely consumed by a 21-mile choke point in the Middle East, China is using the distraction to advance its own interests in the Indo-Pacific.
Without firing a single shot.
They are probing supply chains, testing cyber vulnerabilities, and testing regional deterrence, all without firing a single shot.
The global scramble to adapt is fascinating. Every country is suddenly fending for itself in a way we haven't seen in decades. You have the Indian Navy launching